Nikki is of Nikki is of the Diné Navajo Nation and resides in northern Arizona with her family. Nikki has a bachelor's and master's degrees in forestry from Northern Arizona University with an emphasis on traditional or indigenous knowledge. She speaks and teaches her children the Diné language and culture. Professionally, she is the co-manager of ITEP's Tribes and Climate Change Program and interim assistant director of ITEP. You're going to have to explain to us what that is, whose goal is to strengthen tribal capacity and sovereignty in environmental and natural science and natural resource management through culturally relevant education, research, partnerships, and policy-based services. She works across the continental US and Alaska on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience planning with tribal and indigenous partners to assist tribal nations in addressing and preparing for climate change impacts. Nikki?
Great, thank you so much, Patty. I appreciate and Kirsten, the kind introduction to your organization, and also, yeah, sorry, there's a question in there. It says, are we supposed to be seeing anyone on our screens right now? I hope you can see me.
Nikki, I can see you and your presentation.
Great, okay, sounds good, thank you. Again, thank you for the invitation to be here. I hope I give you some insight into the work that I do and about who I am and the kind of work I do and why I have this title. So, but first I wanted to introduce myself in the Diné way, out of respect for all my relatives that are out there that might be listening, but also my non-human relatives. Plants, animals, the water, the air, fire that we're having now, we consider them relatives. Kinya ani nishle look at the na e bashishin is a lana e dashnale to head line e dashiche. Bestot is do shat to the e nasha a kut awa dina a sana nishle. I always introduce myself in this way. This is the way we were taught from the moment we could speak and also learn our clans, their identity and how we relate to other folks around the world. I once introduced myself to someone in the Minneapolis airport and we spent a good hour talking. So it's all about kinship. So we honor our matriarchs, our mothers. So I am of the Towering House clan, my mother's clan, and then I'm born from my father's mother's clan, the Reed people. And then my maternal grandfathers, their matriarchs, come from the water that flows together. And then my paternal grandfathers come from the many goats people. And I come from Shanto and Blue Gap. Those are where where I truly come from. And as Patty was saying, I am an alumni of Northern Arizona University, and I live here in Flagstaff with my family. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I do, but my favorite job probably is being a parent to two young children. I think, yeah, they're 8 and 11. And they may come in, but I welcome children, dogs, cats into these sessions. And please ask questions if you can, or make a comment. I'd love to have a conversation with you. So ITEP, I don't know if you've heard of ITEP. The Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals has been around since 1993. And it was created to serve tribes, to help them build capacity to do their own air quality monitoring. And it has slowly grown to several programs into 30 years, including Waste and Response, the National Tribal Air Association, National Tribal Water Council. We have an environmental education outreach program. We work with interns during the summer and school year. And then the climate change program, which is what I help manage. And so we actually work around the country, as Patty said, working with tribes, mostly federally recognized tribes and some non-federally recognized or state recognized tribes and their partners. So I've worked with federal, state, nonprofit, academic, and so on, folks on adaptation and mitigation planning. And you're probably wondering, what is that? That basically means I do a lot of training and workshops and one-on-one work with tribal professionals who are tasked with writing a plan, a management plan to address the impacts, whether it's wildfire, plant loss, cultural language loss, etc., what have you. We have done it. So we provide a lot of services, tools, resources, and connections. And so if you go to our website, we do a lot like status of tribes and climate change report, which is focused on the climate resilience efforts of tribes across the country. Just came out last August, and it's available for free online. And I'll put it in the chat box in a little bit. We also have a national climate conference. We actually we brag about people and their efforts. We are working on national reports such as the National Climate Assessment that's coming up, the 5th one. And anyway, and so on. So, and then Patty, you asked about what I do as interim assistant director. So my boss is now the vice president of Office of Native American Initiatives over at NAU. So so her assistant director is now the interim director, and I'm the assistant interim director. So we do a lot of, so basically means I do more meetings, more admin work, and more talking, which I don't mind. I like talking. I might be one of those Navajos you meet that likes to talk. So I love my work in working with tribes, making sure they get what they need. So check out our website. Again, this is kind of what we do. So we do quite a bit. One of the examples we're doing is that we're working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs on relocation cohort for Alaska tribes, and kind of making sure that they have what they need to relocate their communities, and also keeping track of kind of where their traditional gathering, subsistence gathering sites are, and making sure that those plants or animals are preserved somehow, or I don't know how that can happen up in Alaska, but that is something that we incorporate into our work. So yeah, we do a lot. I could go on about ITEP, but I want to get to the fun stuff, and I'd love to talk more if you are interested in this. If you visit our website, we also have a mind map where if you want to learn more about traditional knowledges or the different working groups out there related to climate change, traditional knowledges, tribes, and the environment, you'll find it on this mind map. Access to all the reports, funding sources, trainings, data, communication tools, you name it. We try to help tribes, because tribes actually, some of them or most of them are under-resourced, understaffed. So we kind of help step in that role as a support system for them. And I could regale you with stories about the lack of capacity, but I can also tell you about a lot of the success stories that we have. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that in this adaptation planning, so when I went to forestry school, I had to write a big fat management plan that contained parks and recreation, wildlife resources, civiculture. It was so thick. I never wanted to see that document again. I think I recycled it. But then lo and behold, my whole job is writing adaptation plans or helping tribes write adaptation plans and reviewing them. And we have a toolkit that's specific to tribes that can help them, not start from scratch, and kind of incorporate what they're prioritizing in addressing climate change, whether that's wildlife, preserving culture, preserving a specific plant or tree species, and so on. because climate change impacts really everything. Earlier, I was on a webinar, a health webinar, and I was talking about how climate change not only impacts the physical aspects of our lives, you know, whether it's our bodies or our homes, the trees outside our house. I mean, we have that going on right now here in Flagstaff and in parks and whatnot. But what we don't often talk about is how that impacts the culture, the traditions, the medicine that the plants and the animals are used for, but also our prayers, the loss of language, the loss of songs and whatnot. So it's very much intertwined and very tightly connected. Climate change impacts not only the physical, but the emotional and the spiritual. So that is my whole being right there. When I grew up on the res, you know, I grew up without electricity and running water, but this, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this whole philosophy of how natural and cultural resources are not different, but they're the same. That plants are our relatives, that we should treat them as we would treat the person that we love the most, or people we love the most, and respect. In that sense, you know, we incorporate that into our climate planning. Almost done here. Getting to what I think is the fun stuff. The tribal adaptation plans and vulnerability assessments, there's over 60 of them that are out there. Some of them are, you know, 10 years or a little bit more older. Some are more recent, and they're really fun to read. I've read almost every one of them, but the ones I remember the most are the ones that mention culture, language, and non-human relatives. They're technical, but they also really put an emphasis on the qualitative aspect of planning, of caring for the environment. And they put their own language and culture into it. So they're really representing the tribes, and they're not afraid to acknowledge that their traditional knowledges are just as important as Western science or non-Indigenous science. So, and that's on our website too, if you're interested, or you can just Google it, but we have all in one place. Just more examples of the plans that are out there. Navajo Nation has a couple of them. They have an adaptation plan, but they also have a specific one that they wrote for their forestry department. More talking about the trees and wildfires and stuff like that. So anyways, I just wanted to show you kind of what their cover pages look like. They're really, some are really fancy, some are really simple, and they all have the same impact to the reader. They're different, but there's a lot of similar philosophies. Like I said, Navajo Nation priority topics. I think I just wanted to make sure we knew about this. You saw this one because there's not very many people know there's an adaptation plan out there, but we kind of helped in the beginning with this, but then they wrote the rest of it. Their priority topics are water is at the forefront. And then the feral horses, that's a huge problem out there, causing overgrazing. It's really sad, horses are dying. Communication, you know, broadband telecommunication is really poor out there. And you know, they call cell phones, you know, in Navajo, the one that you spin around with. That's what my grandmother called it. There's no word for cell phone except that description. There's again, overgrazing, air quality, illegal dumping. There's so many problems because of the lack of infrastructure on the reservation, particularly mine. And because because there's, you know, not that direct specific funding that is dedicated, and you know, that's another webinar, but I wanted to mention that because it all has an impact on the land, and how we care for it and how we don't care for it. So I just want to mention that. I wanted to get into traditional knowledges. I'm wondering if you all have access to the chat box, and if you could tell me in the chat box, what do you think about traditional knowledges? What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear traditional knowledges? And there's no right or wrong answer. So I'm hoping someone can type something in there while I talk. So that would be great. And Helen, yes, you think of the sun. Yes, Father Sun, Father Sky. Yeah, please continue to put more in there, and I'll read them out as I see them. There's no universal description of or definition, excuse me, of traditional knowledges. The terms are interchangeable. I should have put something else in here. According to the Biden administration, put a mandate for all federal policymaking decisions to consider and even incorporate Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. That's a victory for us Indigenous people. It's huge, because when I was in school, it was considered not real science or data. It was hearsay, anecdotal. I heard the whole gambit and whatnot. So people call it traditional ecological knowledges, TEK, or Indigenous knowledges, native knowledges, environmental knowledge, local knowledge. But for me, my preference, I call it Indigenous traditional knowledges. And it's plural because there's many forms of knowledge in the community. There's many different types of knowledges right in this room, right? So I just want to make sure we honor that. And I just want to read a few more. Oh, this is so great. Passed down from previous generations, ethnobotany and the use of plants. Susan says, things my grandparents and parents told me. Ian says, TK, what indigenous people know of and about everyone in relationships and have long before Western science. Mary says, things that people know because they have known them for generations. Absolutely, all of the above. Thank you so much for sharing. I think those are just beautiful out there, what you've said. It's something that's a big part of my life, Indigenous knowledges. And I just want to also acknowledge that local knowledge of even non-Indigenous people is really, really important. You know, our ancestors, okay, I'm going to say my husband's ancestors came to this continent and settled in Iowa, and they became farmers, corn farmers. They don't no longer do that, but that was, you know, that local knowledge where that information was passed down at least 3 to 4 generations. And I was lucky to be around his father when he was farming the land, and it was just beautiful. And my husband grew up with that type of knowledge. So I want to acknowledge that there is local knowledge that is not considered tribal or Indigenous, but you know, they could be very similar and whatnot. So you know, there's a document out there, and I should have shared it in the beginning, but it's called Guidelines to Considering Traditional Knowledges and Climate Change Initiatives. It's really long, but they have like 8 guidelines, and it's really key advice to people who want to work with Indigenous knowledges of whether it's in research, a project, but especially in gathering data of any sort, that you understand the key concepts, who are the holders of that knowledge systems. Oh, it says air quality, excuse me, and how our traditional knowledge is relevant to climate change, air quality, or whatever you're doing, but especially here in this space where we're talking about plants. You know, you are the holders of some of that knowledge systems, and who did you learn it from, and who are you going to pass it on to? You know, you got to understand, we have to understand all of that when it comes to these knowledge systems. The second guideline, when you're working with Indigenous peoples, and I've had the privilege of working, say, with the Cherokee tribe in North Carolina, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And this held true. I was an outsider coming in asking about the fire use to take care of how to use fire to take care of their lands. And I wish I had this document because I was a researcher coming into a community asking for this type of information. And I quickly realized that they have every right to say no. They have every right to say no anytime, even though you may have a verbal agreement at the beginning, but that the tribes have every right to not participate or to give you information. So whether it's an individual or a tribal government or a group of people like elders. And then the guideline 3 says understanding and communicating risks, because lately, well, when growing up in my college years and later years, that understanding and communicating risks for Indigenous peoples and the holders of these knowledges, you got to realize they're not really protected. They're not, they often get copyrighted by outsiders and used for profit without giving back to the communities. And they run that risk of that misuse, mishandling, misappropriation, which can really affect the spirituality and the rights of the the traditional knowledge holders and also the community themselves. There must be a clear, transparent communication. If you want to gather knowledge about a certain plant within the community, you must make sure that if you're asking these questions, they could be sensitive and they may say, this is not the right time for me to tell you about this. I'm not the right person. I don't have permission to give you that knowledge. So you can't push them. If they say no, they say no. But there must be some sort of transparency or maybe like an MOU or something that's between the traditional knowledge holders, the tribe, and also the people who are wanting that information, whether it's a group of people within the non-Indigenous community, the federal government, or an academic institution. So, and then I'm almost done here. Number 5 says that ensure that all federal staff working with tribes are not putting those traditional knowledges at risk, meaning you're not putting them out there for the world to see and profit off of without the permission of the knowledge holders. And a lot of this information should not be given out. It should be remain confidential, sensitive, unless you're giving specific permission. So a lot of people have done that to me and to a lot of tribes, and the knowledge that is passed down. It may not seem like a big deal, but to us Indigenous peoples, the traditional knowledge holders, it means a lot that if we request that protection, confidentiality, that it's followed. And that's one way to gain trust. Again, as I said in the beginning, that there's different multiple knowledge systems and holders, and they all have different roles. And it's important to recognize the sovereign rights of Indigenous peoples that have access to this knowledge and that control it, they maintain it. And it's our or their right to give or deny access to it. Free, prior, and informed consent. So, like the Yurok tribe in Northern California have a cultural council, and nothing goes past them without their permission, their review, and whatnot. So, and the Navajo Nation, they have the Navajo Nation Institutional Review Board. So, and then there's knowledge holders like my grandmother. You have to go through her before anything else. The last one, it's good to develop guidelines for review of grant proposals that recognize the value of TKs, but also ensuring the protection of these knowledges. It's something that I always ask when people want to partner with tribes, is that you ask all these questions so the traditional knowledges of people are protected, and all the data collected belongs to the tribe, even though especially sensitive information that has been recorded, documented filmed anything like that. It belongs to the tribes, the community themselves, and whatnot. So, and I'll provide this. So the fun stuff here is that I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I don't know if any of you have been to Shanto. Do you know where Shanto is? I don't know if you can put in the chat box if you know where Shanto, Black Mesa, Navajo National Monument is. So I come from Shanto mostly. My mother's family is from Blue Gap near Canyon de Chelly. And this is my sister's picture of our land that we grew up in. And in the background, you can see Black Mesa. And if you ever go to Kayenta or the San Juan River, you drive right by that mesa. And this is really a really beautiful area. I think one of the most beautiful areas. It's not so quiet anymore with all the traffic going through. So I grew up as the daughter of a coal miner. He was an engineer at Peabody Coal Company until he was forced to retire. But I grew up here herding sheep, sometimes 50-mile round trip to watering holes. I almost went up to the mesa many times where to find forage and to find water for the sheep. I would ride horses. I would sleep outside. I would help my grandparents and parents grow crops, but also I wish I was better at some of the traditional plants, or I wish I remember most of them, but I literally grew up eating wild carrots, or using them for dye, but also eating wild onions, drinking sage, Navajo tea, all that stuff. So I was really fortunate to have that intimate relationship that really guides who I am today in my work. As many of you on this call probably know, if you're harvesting a plant, you don't pull the whole thing out. You take a part of it. You don't take all the plants in one spot so that it may regenerate the next year. So that was something that was taught to us, instilled in us at a very young age, is that we respect our plant relatives as much as possible. And you're probably thinking, your dad was a coal miner and you have this philosophy, and they clash, right? And I was taught that philosophy by him, but he worked at the coal mine so he could support our family. And I know I have definitely profited off of his time at the Peabody coal mine, but also knowing that he was doing that, sacrificing his time and himself so he could support his family. And I'm grateful that he's never, gone all the way to the dark side. Now he drives a hybrid vehicle. He barely uses the electricity that he has at home. We just got electricity about 5 years ago. We used to have cornfields that were huge. This is a really small one compared to what we have, and that's because of drought. This mega drought that we're going through, or have been going through, and the rising temperatures. Because we don't have a hose, we can just hook up to a well or our house. No, this is far away from our house, and we have to hand water all of these plants every day, unless it's, we have rain like we did last summer. But each morning, my mom sometimes goes in there and she prays. Before we even put the kernels of the seeds into the ground, we pray and make our offerings and ask them to nourish us. So we have kind of that intimate relationship. We give as much as they're going to give us. So you have to act really properly when you're in that cornfield, because we don't want the corn to grow wild. If you're naughty, teasing people, each other, the corn's also going to be naughty because they have ears, right? No pun intended. But yeah, really, they do hear and feel what we're putting into them and whatnot. So this is pretty small, and it's been pretty dry out there. So hopefully we have better luck next year and whatnot. So in my previous life, I used to be a river guide, and I used to kind of teach kind of the trees that I knew down there, the plants that I knew and whatnot. And I just want to say this is a really important part of my life, because I never knew there was river guiding down in the Grand Canyon or in the San Juan or on any of the rivers until I stepped foot on a boat at age 19. I might have been 18. So that's what I did for about 13 years before I decided that I liked my husband better than guiding full time. So so when I was down there, I was reintroduced some plants I hadn't seen in a long time and whatnot. So anyways, I just wanted to say that was a wonderful part of my life that I worked. A lot of my work is really based on my children, why I do my work, and the philosophy that I have is for my children, and so they can know what it's like not to rely on electricity or running water or a grocery store. That they know where the apples come from. They know how animals, wildlife, game, what kind of uses that they have, not just for food, and whatnot. So that my son is making an offering in the upper right hand corner to a tree in early spring. He's making an offering. So because we know that that tree is going to give us shade and maybe some food, to not just to us, but to the insects and the animals. And my daughter's wearing a Navajo moccasin, and that's something that us women wear, not just for ceremonies, but just for everyday use, made out of cow hide and deer skin. So that's something that I really try to instill in my children, even though they're half German and they're half Navajo. But so my husband is very supportive of our culture, and he makes sure that our ways of life and our language and our traditional practices are very much tied to who we are, very much tied to our future. This is not my hogan, but this is a hogan some of my relatives built near Black Mesa. Because if you don't know the meaning of a hogan, you should study it. But I'll tell you, the shape of the hogan, this female hogan, represents the womb, a mother's womb. And when you go inside her during the summer or winter, she's either going to warm you, cool you down, nourish you, and keep you safe. She's providing that shelter for you. And then the corn on the lower right hand corner is my mother's. And we grind it when it's still wet off the cob, and then we make kneel down bread, which we dry, and then after we bake it, we dry it, and then we store it for the winter, because you can put it into soups. You can munch on it that way. But yeah, so, and then we dry some of the current corn so we can have more to plant, but also we use it for stews and trading and all that good stuff, and sometimes for money, but our family likes to trade more often. So I wanted to show, I don't know if you're familiar with any of these plants, but I just wanted to show you a few plants that are important to us. I hope I got the plant names right, the scientific names. I took this from the New Mexico State University Rangeland website because they had the best pictures. But my mom remembers and talks often of wild carrots. I don't remember eating it. I remember using it more for dye. This wild carrot I never ate, but it's not really a carrot, I guess, but it's more like a rhubarb, and it's kind of like a name for it, sandock, but we called it wild carrots, and we used it to dye our wool. My mom raises churro sheep, and then she dyes their wool and uses it for weaving. and whatnot. And also greasewood, she remembers this, and it's still out there. I remember this one too, about how they would use it to wash your hands. You know, you rub it and then we rub sand in it. You don't really need water. So but well, if you mix it with water, it does get soapy. So that's one thing that she remembers very fondly. And I was just talking about this with her last year and whatnot. Ian says also kind of, I'm not even going to try that, but like gorgeous rhubarb relative. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. It is beautiful. And the other one is globe mallow. And this is one of my favorite plant species. It does grow, it's more prolific, right? It grows in more places, like in my backyard here on Townsend, Winona. But what I like about this is the memory of my daughter when she goes to the Star School out on Loop Road, the Service to All Relations off-grid school. And what I remember is that she came home when she was 4 years old. She was, I don't know, maybe preschool then. And she goes, and I just got an ant bite. And then she goes, here. And she took the leaves and chewed it, and the flower at the same time she chewed it. And then she put it on my ant bite. And I go, where did you learn this? She goes, oh, my grandma at school taught me, because they have elders that come in and teach them and spend time with them. But I love that. And so I love globe mallow. And then also pinyon pine, of course, one of my favorite trees. We use that, we boil the needles for tea. But also when we're ready to butcher a sheep or a goat, for meat, before we do anything, we take a branch off the tree, and then we kind of slap gently the sheep or the goat, and we say a prayer, and we give thanks to the animal for nourishing us and whatnot. We must do that at every time. And also, the pinyon nuts off of that, the sap that we use for pottery, but also for ailments. But yeah, and lotion, everything. It's just a multi-purpose plant. I just wanted to show you a few of my relatives that we love to see, that we love to use. And I want to end with this. Indigenous people do not see the environment, the wildlife, the sky, the animals, the water as separate. It's all one thing. When these relatives that you see in front of you are harmed, it really, for someone like me, and probably you too, my heart aches, and it's really sad, because these are plant relatives that have a purpose in life, and it's too bad that there are many people that don't understand the value of our relatives, and they may just see the wild carrot as a weed because it's not beautiful, appealing, visual, aesthetically pleasing, and whatnot. So I just want to mention that. If you want to learn more about, I'm going to put a plug in for the Status of Tribes and Climate Change report. If you want to know more about what tribes are doing across the country addressing climate change, you can go ahead and read this document that it's first of its kind. It's a national report that we put out at the end of August. And the cool thing is that there's each of the 12 chapters starts with a narrative, a story from the tribes themselves. So, and it really talks about the interconnectedness I was talking about earlier. Of how we're connected to the past, the present, the future, but everything in this world we're very much tied to, and we should all be thinking about that connectedness, because we've always adapted as a five-fingered species, but we have to adapt even faster. Things are just moving too quickly. Growing up here in Flagstaff, I remember fires not coming this early. You all remember that. You remember more of the native plants growing and prospering. Now, there's not that many. They're hiding. And we do it for our 7 generations, for our children, and the 7 generations of humans, but also the animal species, the insects, the water species, everything. So we do it for them. So I hope I gave you a little insight to who I am, my work, and I really appreciate you sitting here for about a little bit more than 30 minutes hearing me talk. And I hope you learned something, and I'm happy to ask questions, or you can tell me your stories or provide comments and whatnot. So in ending, that picture in the middle right there, that's at Star School, and they're actually gathering sumac berries right outside their school, and they actually make porridge out of it, and then they make tea out of it. So they're teaching my children and their classmates a lot of the traditional knowledges. They're not forced to do it, I will say that, but they're kind of opening their eyes to the traditional knowledges that have maintained their people and whatnot. So with that, I'm gonna stop. So I appreciate it. And I'm gonna drink some water and take a deep breath.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.